Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's an AP sports writer, host of Faith on the Field, and a host of 97.5 The Fanatic in Philadelphia. Please welcome Rob Maaddi to the program. Rob, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Hey, it's great to be with you, John. Thank you so much.
So, Rob, what was your reaction to the Carson Wentz trade?
Honestly, my first initial thought was, hallelujah, this is over. We don't have to deal with the constant Wentz watch and the stories leaking out from the team and around the league and all the nonsense that's been happening. So that was it was a relief that was over with and that we could move forward and look at the new direction of the team. And obviously, from the standpoint of what the Eagles were able to do and what they were able to get, you look at the trade and then you evaluate that, you evaluate what they have coming in. But I think there was a lot of relief, not just from people covering it like myself, but a lot of fans, because they were just waiting and waiting, and it finally happened. The Eagles pulled the trigger, and it's a new era now in Philadelphia.
Who won the trade to you?
Oh, I think the Indianapolis Colts won that trade because Carson Wentz, to me, if he's healthy, if he's right, if he's in the right system, which I think he will be with Frank Reich, where he thrived with Frank in 16 and 17, especially in 17 in Philly, I believe that's a team that is already, they're a playoff team, and they were a playoff team last year, and Carson Wentz could take them to another level. They could actually maybe win in the playoffs and advance. As far as the Eagles, I didn't think it was a bad deal because they're a team that, one, you're rebuilding, and you need to acquire as much draft capital as possible. With or without Carson Wentz, this isn't a playoff team in Philly next year and potentially the year after that. So you got a young quarterback in Jalen Hurts who's shown potential, who's somebody they invested a high draft pick in, a second-round pick, 53rd overall, and a new coaching staff that might be able to help this kid grow, develop, and be the quarterback of the future. We don't know that. So in order to hand it over to Jalen, they move on from Carson. They get a third-round pick and a potential first. And it's important if that can translate into a one. And Carson's got to meet those standards, play 70% of the snaps or 75%. 70% and playoffs are 75% without the playoffs. If that's the case for a quarterback coming off the worst season of his career, that's not bad. That's in line with what I thought the Eagles were going to be able to get for Carson Wentz. So time will tell for sure, John, who really won the trade. And it depends on who the Eagles draft with those picks. That's the area that's most concerning to Eagles fans, is that they have had numerous draft failures over the last several years. They haven't drafted a Pro Bowl player other than Carson Wentz since 2014. And that's why they're at the point where they are now, where they're 4-11-1, new coach, new quarterback, new system, new everything, because they can't pick players in the draft, and that's a problem.
Rob Maaddi here on Sports Talk Chicago. Rob, should Jalen Hurts start next year? Does he deserve it to you?
To me, he does. I believe from what I saw in 4 games, you can't make a determination one way or another on 4 games. And I saw enough out of him to want to see more. I saw some talent. He's a dual threat quarterback who can throw for 300 and run for 100. And there's some things he certainly has to work on: completion percentage, reads, everything. And that comes with being a young quarterback who was thrown in as a starter after not having an off season. When there were no OTAs, everything was different last year. So I saw enough out of him on the field. And then he's got the intangibles, John. He's got great leadership potential, poise, character. He doesn't get rattled. We know what he did in college. So he's been in a big game environment. He's played in front of huge fan bases. So he's not somebody who you have to worry about all of the intangibles. I think he checks off all those boxes. So being that you invested such a high pick in him and ultimately it led to the demise of the franchise quarterback, I think the Eagles really owe it to themselves to find out what Jalen Hurts is and give him a full season as the starting quarterback. Whether they go 3-13, 2-14, 6-10, does not matter. I think the key for 2021 is to find out if Jalen Hurts is the future.
How do you feel about that? The fact that Hurts kind of came in and just uplifted or uprooted the franchise quarterback. Was that a problem to you or to anybody in media or fans out there?
Oh, I think a lot of fans had a problem with that, and some of the sports talk radio hosts, I'm sure, I've heard many of them talk about it where they didn't think that was fair, and that's understandable. I initially I read it wrong. I'll be honest. When he came in, I didn't think that this was going to be as much of an impact on Carson Wentz as it turned out to be. I didn't like the pick at first. I thought the Eagles had more. They were a 9-7 team that went to the playoffs, and they needed more weapons. Whether it was another running back like J.K. Dobbins, who was picked after him, or whether it was a safety like Jeremy Chin, who also was picked after him, I thought they needed to improve the team on the field. And I thought that by drafting Jalen Hurts, they were trying to bring in a guy who, although he's different than Taysom Hill, just use him in a variety of roles like Taysom Hill and give them insurance as a backup quarterback. I did not anticipate it would contribute to Carson Wentz falling apart completely. Had the worst season of his career, was a bottom 3 quarterback in the NFL last year, and all of those factors. Obviously, you can't just pin the whole Jalen Hurts arrival on Carson Wentz's decline, because the team had so many issues up front on the offensive line. They had at least 12 or 13 different offensive line combinations. The receivers were young and inexperienced. There was not a lot of trust with the receivers. Carson was constantly under pressure, and he didn't have a lot of trust or faith in the offensive system. So all of that has contributed to where he is and why he's no longer here. But I looking back, I think the Eagles themselves will tell you, yeah, we probably didn't make the right decision here.
Who would you say is most to blame for where the Eagles are right now?
That's got to be the front office, and that's got to fall on general manager Howie Roseman, because although he built a team or put together a team that won a Super Bowl in 2017, those draft failures he's ultimately responsible. And we don't know if he's the guy who's making all the picks, but he's the one who is the personnel boss. So if he's listening to certain scouts or certain coaches or whoever it is telling him, we want you to take Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, or we want you to take J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, or whatever decision it was, ultimately it falls on him. So they haven't been able to replenish through the draft. And when you don't have young players who are star quality, you don't even have to be a Pro Bowler, but somebody who can consistently go out there and contribute and be playing on a rookie contract where you don't have to overpay them. You don't have to pay them much. When you don't have those kind of guys in the system, that's where you get to this point where it's a complete debacle. So ultimately, I think it falls on Howie Roseman, because he's the one in charge of putting this roster together, and that's why they're here right now.
Do you have any hope about their future?
I really don't, and I say it. I say it because it's a prove me world, right? And if you can't, as many draft picks as they have, and as many as they may potentially accumulate, if you haven't shown over the last 5, 6, 7 years that you're going to be able to bring in good players, quality players, I can't believe in you. I can't trust in you until you actually go out there and make some picks. Now, the jury's still out on the 2020 draft, for example. Jalen Reagor could still end up being a quality Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. He didn't show it last year, but he still could develop into that. Andre Dillard, their first round pick in 2019, who was injured last year, didn't play. He may develop into a left tackle who can solidify that side of the offensive line for a decade. So I don't want to say all of the drafts were terrible. Miles Sanders, who was a second round pick 2 years ago, is a quality player who's got star potential in the league. But until they can consistently draft, especially on the first and second day, and bring in players who are impactful, I don't have much faith and trust in the organization. And then, John, there's also some of the things that you hear, some of the comments former players say, and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that's happened in Philadelphia, and whether it was Malcolm Jenkins on the record saying that he felt disrespected by the front office and that's why he left, or I spoke to a former player a couple of weeks ago who said Carson Wentz wasn't the problem. Doug Peterson wasn't the problem. Howie Roseman is the problem, and he's still there. I think those are concerning things. I personally like Howie. We get along well, and I think he has a lot of areas of his job that he does very well. But when it comes to drafting players, that's where they need significant improvement.
Rob Maaddi here on Sports Talk Chicago. Rob, are the Phillies true contenders this season?
The Phillies, to me, they're a wild card contender. If things break right, they could be in the mix. You need a lot of guys to play up to their potential. And in baseball, over the course of a long season, it really depends on health. They had a historically bad bullpen last year. They've added some arms, Archie Bradley, Brandon Kinsler, a couple other guys, Tony Watson, Hector Rondon, Jose Alvarado. They need a couple of those guys to pitch up to their past performance levels. They need to stay healthy on offense. Their starting pitching, Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, are a pretty formidable 1-2. But they kind of struggled last year in September. So you need both of those guys to show you in big games where you need one win. The Phillies lost their combined last 6 starts when Wheeler and Nola pitched last September, and they finished one game out of a playoff spot. So I think they're around an 85-win team. If things break right, if Bryce Harper has a monster season, if JT Realmuto can continue to show why he's the best catcher in baseball, a couple other guys step up. Scott Kingery, to me, might be a wild card, a breakout player. If he has a big season offensively, they could get to 90. It wouldn't surprise me if they're in the 90 to 92 win range. But this is a team that hasn't made the postseason in 9 years, hasn't had a winning season since 2011. So until they win 85, I'm not going to predict them to be better than that at this point.
How do they stack up against the rest of the division? Because I know the Mets got much better this offseason.
Yeah, it's a tough division. You can make an argument where the Phillies are right now just a third-place team, which is where they were last year. Atlanta is obviously the defending champion. They're very good. The Mets got better. The Marlins are a team we saw last year, a team on the rise. But can the Marlins sustain that success over the course of a long season? They were able to get into playoffs in a shortened 60-game year. I don't know how much talent they have. They got a lot of young talent, but I don't know if they can compete with the Phillies over the course of a whole season. I think they're also in that 80 to 86 win range. And then, of course, the Washington Nationals, too. It's certainly the toughest division in baseball. And that's why you might not see a team in this division, because they play each other so often. They're going to beat up on each other a lot. The division winner might be a 92-win team, a 91-win team, because you're not going to see a 95, 98, 100-win team in this division.
What's the Phillies' top strength, would you say?
Offense. They finished fifth in runs scored last year, tied for fifth in runs scored last year. They have all their players returning now that Didi Gregorius and JT Realmuto were re-signed. Andrew McCutchen is now a year further removed from ACL surgery. So I think although he's on the other side of his career, I still think he could be a quality left fielder, top of the lineup guy. Bryce Harper, we think about him being in a league for so long. He's entering his 10th season, but he's only 28. And he's really, I think, entering the peak years of his career. You look at they need an answer in center field, and that's where I think it could be Scott Kingery. But they have depth in this lineup, top to bottom. Alec Bohm, who had a tremendous rookie season last year, is a guy who's very impressive. He can hit anywhere from 2 to 6 in the lineup, and he gives them a lot of depth too as well. So I think their offense is going to be their strong suit. They're not going to have a problem scoring runs. They just need their bullpen to be able to hold it. They blew 21 leads last year, 21.
What other teams could you see contending this year, either in the NL or the AL, both?
Oh man, in the AL, I always look at the Rays because I just love the way they do things, right? And obviously they reached the World Series last year, so I look at a team like the Rays. In the National League, the Mets to me are very interesting. They haven't been a pennant-winning team in a while. They haven't reached the World Series. They've made a lot of moves. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot to be excited about. Of course, we know the Dodgers are good. So I look at the Mets and I look at the Rays, Oakland, White Sox, some of those teams. It's baseball's wide open, man, and that's the great thing. Baseball's wide open. And you have some of the dominant teams, but then you also look around the league and go, somebody always that you don't expect to be a 90-win team, a playoff team, comes out of nowhere. And I would certainly expect somebody to step up this year. It could be the Phillies. It could be the Phillies who go from not being in the playoffs for 9 years to being a 90-win team that can sneak in and things break right, and then they could be there at the end.
Who's your way too early World Series champion?
Way too early World Series champion, man. You know what? Let me go with the San Diego Padres. They've made so many moves, ton of moves. It would be cool for baseball to see the San Diego Padres with the money that they've spent out of nowhere. I'm going to go with them as my way, like you said, way too early World Series champion.
Rob Maaddi, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. And Rob, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, what's the story behind your faith?
Oh man, I could talk forever about this, John. My faith developed as a young kid. I grew up in the church. I grew up going to Catholic school, and I went for 12 years. But I didn't realize that it wasn't about religion. It was about a relationship with the Lord. So I was living a life where I would do my thing for 6 days a week, and then I would go to church on Sunday, and then I'd leave God there. I'd leave Jesus there at the altar, and then I'd go do whatever I wanted to do, and I'd start all over. I'd go to confession. And it wasn't really until 2010 where, after I had been through a series of relationship failures, all my fault because I wasn't faithful and I was just going from one relationship to another. I got caught up hanging out with athletes as a young guy and going to bars and clubs and partying with them and kind of living that lifestyle with some of those guys. And we'd compete to see who can hook up more and things like that. And I would tell myself, John, like, oh, I'm just doing this. I'm hanging out so I can get the scoop on some of the teams that I'm covering, but honestly, we never really talked anything about the sports or the teams. We were just out there partying, and I reached a low point in 2010 where I had been just from one relationship to another, and I felt empty. I felt a void in my life. I went out 36 straight days, and I remember where I was when Roy Halladay threw a perfect game against Miami. I was in a bar. And that night was a wild night. I went from one to another, and I wasn't much of a drinker, but I was still going out because I was womanizing, right?
Right.
I reached a point that year, and it was August 29, 2010. God had put people in my life who were trying to steer me in the right direction. They were planting seeds, and I wasn't ready to accept what they were telling me. But one person after another kept just leading me in the right direction, nudging me. A friend of mine named Timmy read me Ephesians 2:8-9, in which it says you are not saved by works that you do. You're just saved by grace. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time. But as I dove into the Bible and I started reading it, I was like, wow, everything I had learned up to this point, it's not necessarily what Jesus Christ was all about. He didn't care about the religion and the man-made traditions and the rituals. It's about having that relationship with him. So I was in Times Square Church on August 29, 2010, and I was dating someone who led me there at the time, and she said to me, like, we're not meant to have a relationship, but God put me in your life to prepare you for your next one. I thought, that's kind of odd, but I went to church with her 3 times, and I went to this church, Times Square Church, non-denominational. It was different than anything I'd ever seen in my life. There wasn't, all of the sitting, kneeling, all that. It was different. And on this third trip there, I remember hearing the testimony of a man who was a former drug dealer. And he said he was caught in a drug bust, and the cop took the stash of drugs that he had and threw him down a sewer and told the man, I'm going to give you a second chance at life rather than arrest him. And this guy said he ran off that day and realized that cop was Jesus in disguise, giving him one more opportunity. He never sold drugs again. He never did drugs again. He went into ministry, and he was there at that church on that day sharing what happened in his life several years later. So at the end of that testimony, the pastor invited anyone in the congregation, anyone there who wanted to come down and just surrender to the Lord. And I was living this wild life, and I kept feeling this nudge like, hey, it's time. It's time for you to do this. It's time for you to give up. You can't do this on your own. You're not going to overcome any issues you have on your own. And so I walked down. Times Square Church is like an old theater, and I was sitting way up in like the nosebleed section. So I walked down to the front, and it was at that moment that I just said, Lord, I surrender to you. I can't do this on my own. I need you to come into my life and make me the man you want me to be. And at that moment, at that exact moment, I felt the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. I felt like I was no longer in this battle alone, trying to do it by myself. And I had Jesus with me. And I turned around, and people are cheering for me, clapping for me, high-fiving me, hugging me, everything. I walked out of that church, and I was a new person. I had been a fan of Christ my whole life, John. But at that moment, I now became a follower. And it was a big difference from being a fan on the outside to being a follower. As a follower of Christ, I wanted to know more. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to live like him. I wanted to love like him, forgive like him, care like him. So I really dove into the Bible, started reading it, and started just getting a lot of mentoring. And a couple months later, I met my future wife, Remy, and that woman who led me to that church was right. We weren't meant to be in a relationship, but she prepared me for the next one. And 3-4 months later, I met Remy. We were early in our walk with the Lord, and it continued developing, and we studied together, learned together. And then soon after, we got married, and we had children. A couple years later, a friend of mine introduced me to a prison ministry softball team, in which you go into prison, you play softball against inmates, but in between games of a doubleheader, we get to preach the gospel. So when I did that for the first time, I didn't even know what I was going to say. I didn't know what I was going to tell these guys. I prayed about it. I said, Holy Spirit, fill me with something. You give me the words. I don't know what to say. And the first time, I remember we were in West Virginia. We were playing against, it was a rainy day. We were playing against these inmates, and it's my turn to speak. And after I shared my moment, my story, my testimony, the reaction from these guys in that prison, some of them in tears, some of them just thanking me, some of them just turning their life over to Christ at that moment. We baptized guys with bottles of water at home plate. It was just an incredible thing. And I did this for a couple of years. And in 2016, I came home one time from a trip to Ohio. We went to 20 prisons in 5 days. And I told my wife, hey, I think I want to quit my job. I don't want to write about sports. I don't want to talk about sports anymore. I want to go into full-time ministry. And she said, well, we just bought a house, and we got 2-year-old twins at the time. And she said, well, what are we going to do? Like, how are you going to do that? So I reached out to a pastor, Pastor Kyle Horner, who a couple of Eagles players go to his church, and I had watched one of his sermons. And I said, hey, Pastor Kyle, I'd love to have a conversation. This is what I'm thinking about doing. I want to go into a full-time ministry. And Kyle was a former quarterback at Tennessee before Peyton Manning. Yeah, before Peyton Manning got there. Then eventually he transferred to Richmond, and he played there. And he said, Rob, why would you give up the talent, skill, and ability that God blessed you with to go in a full-time ministry? Take Jesus to your marketplace. He put you in this position where you are right now. Look for ways to influence your space, your circle, your market, because they need you there. And I thought, wow, that's pretty awesome. One, my wife's going to be happy. I don't have to quit my job. Which, John, she wasn't going to let me do that. But at the time, I had written 2 books called Baseball Faith and Football Faith. They were devotionals with various players, whether they were Hall of Famers or guys on the bench. But I had already been taking Jesus to my marketplace, and it didn't occur to me. I didn't realize it. And I started to think of ways, what else can I do? And that's where this was September 2016. And by the end of that year in early 2017, I had this idea to create Faith on the Field show and take it to sports radio stations across the country, where I get to interview these athletes because I have relationships with them. I have this platform as an AP Sportswriter, and we get to talk about our faith. And the show now is 4 years. We're into our 4th year. We're on 97.5 The Fanatic in Philly, 97.9 ESPN Tallahassee. We're looking to add new markets over the course of the next 3. 3 weeks or so, I believe I can get into 2 or 3 more markets. And it's been just an amazing ride, an incredible journey. I've hosted events with Carson Wentz, with Zach Ertz, with Tim Tebow, with Doug Peterson. So it's been awesome to be able to use sports as a vehicle, as a platform to talk about my faith and to talk about the way God has impacted my life. And in turn, it's become my passion because I just want to help other people. I've seen the change in my life, and all I want to do is help people figure out that there's another way. There's a solution. He can help you too, the same way he helped me.
What's your favorite story that's combined both faith and sports that you've been a part of or you've encountered?
Man, I'll tell you, it was the event that I hosted with Carson Wentz 4 days before the Eagles season opener in 2017. So this was at Eastern University. It was a rainy day. The event was free to the public. Carson, Trey Burton, and Steph Wisniewski came out 4 days before the season opener, and people sat in the rain for like 3 hours waiting for these guys. And we just talked about our faith, and we just talked about the work that God has done in our life. And then the whole time I'm thinking, after we leave, I'm like, wow, the season opener is on a Sunday. This was a Wednesday night. I hope I didn't take these guys too far away from their playbook, from getting ready. Goodness, if Carson Wentz goes out there and throws a couple picks on Sunday, people are going to blame, right? They're going to blame me for it. They're going to say, what was he doing out there? But instead, that was the season that they kicked off and went on to win the Super Bowl. So that Sunday, they're in Washington. They're playing against Washington. They win the game easily. Carson has this incredible play where he escapes the tag. Everybody was called it like the Houdini-like escapes the sack, throws a touchdown to Nelson Aguilar. I was like, wow, this season's going to be special. And thank God I don't have to be blamed for them losing this game.
And Rob, before we finish up today, last question. For those who don't believe, for those searching for maybe what you have, what's your message to them listening?
I'll tell them that I was at rock bottom. I was at rock bottom in 2010. I was partying like a rock star, going from one relationship to another. And I thought that I had all the answers, and I thought that I could control my life and I could take control of what I wanted to do and where I was going to be. And on the outside, I had what appeared to be everything. I had a great life, a beautiful house, an awesome job, everything. But internally, I was still void. I was searching. I was missing something. And for me, that answer was Jesus Christ. When I turned my life over to him and then completely surrendered and allowed him to take control of my life, and I dove into the Bible and I started reading and I started following, and I went from a follower to a disciple when I became part of the prison ministry team. Man, I have found this peace and this joy within that is greater than any accomplishment, that is greater than anything the world tells us we desire or we need, anything material, any of that stuff. To me, that peace and joy from within. You could be at the top of the mountain, MVP, a superstar, a billionaire, whatever it may be, and still have a void in your life, still be missing something inside. Or you could be at the bottom, searching, trying to get to that point and still feel down, depressed, missing something. That hole, that void, Jesus filled it, and he gave me a peace that I wouldn't trade for the world. So I would encourage people out there to seek that peace the same way I got it. There's nothing better than joy and peace in your life.
Well, Rob, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Amazing story and great talk, too, about the Phillies and Eagles, of course. Best wishes to you as spring training gets underway, and hope we could do this again soon. Thank you so much.
You got it, John. I appreciate the opportunity. God bless you, my friend.